The 1970s in Britain were a time of revolution, but beneath the glittering surface, a silent war waged on women in the spotlight. For screen sirens, a positive pregnancy test was often a professional death sentence. Executives held the power to destroy careers, and the price of stardom was paid in secret clinics. Today, we uncover the heartbreaking choices of icons who traded the nursery for the red carpet. Subscribe and comment. Was the price too high? Let us begin. Joan Collins. Long before she became the shoulder-padded icon of dynasty that defined the 1980s, Joan Collins was already the reigning beauty of the British and American film scene. By the late 1960s and leading into the 70s, she was the epitome of glamour. A woman whose face could launch 1,000 ships, but whose career was held together by the fragile threads of studio contracts and public perception. Her life behind the scenes was a tempestuous melodrama that rivaled any script she was given. During this pivotal period of her youth, Joan was entangled in a passionate and volatile romance with the rising Hollywood playboy Warren Beatty. Their relationship was the fodder of international tabloids, a toxic mix of intense attraction and furious arguments that echoed through the hills of Hollywood and the flats of London. When Joan discovered she was expecting a child with Beatty, the world seemed to stop spinning on its axis. It was a time when being an unmarried mother was not just a social pariah status, but a liability to the studios that owned her image. The executives who controlled her destiny viewed a pregnancy as a breach of contract, a physical transformation that would render her uncastable in the sultry, desirable roles she was famous for. The pressure she faced was not subtle. It was an emotional avalanche. Joan Collins later revealed in her memoirs that the decision to end the pregnancy was not entirely her own, but a product of the terrifying environment she lived in. Warren Beatty, focused entirely on his own rising star, reportedly did not see a future with a cradle in the picture, leaving Joan to navigate the crisis largely alone. The journey to the clinic was shrouded in secrecy and deep shame. In those days, such procedures were often clandestine, wrapped in silence to avoid the prying eyes of the press and the judgment of the public. Joan recalls the stark coldness of the experience, the clinical detachment of the doctors that contrasted sharply with the emotional storm raging inside her. She described the harrowing realization that she was trading a life for a lifestyle. She had to walk back onto a film set shortly after the procedure, plastering on a dazzling smile and squeezing into a tight corset, pretending that a part of her soul had not just been chipped away. The industry demanded absolute perfection, and she delivered it, burying her grief under layers of theatrical makeup and the bright, blinding studio lights. She was forced to make an impossible choice between the man she loved, the career she had fought tooth and nail to build, and the life growing inside her. This decision haunted her for decades to come. While she went on to have children later in life and became a devoted mother, that specific moment in her youth remained a scar on her heart. It was the ultimate sacrifice demanded by the gods of cinema. Joan Collins admitted in candid interviews that she often wondered about the child that never was, a ghost of a life exchanged for the silver screen. She wondered if the child would have looked like Warren, or if they would have shared her resilience. Her story is a testament to the brutal reality of the era, where a woman's body was considered the property of the studio, and motherhood was seen as the ultimate career killer. She chose her path, but the silence of that car ride to the clinic echoes through her biography as a moment of profound loneliness. Even years later, when she achieved global domination on television, the shadow of that choice remained in the background. It serves as a reminder that the fierce independence she projected was forged in the fires of difficult decisions. She navigated a man's world by making a choice that no woman should be forced to make under duress. Today, her story stands as the first chapter in our exploration of the hidden cost of fame. Lulu. Lulu was the pocket rocket of the British music and television scene, a bubbly Scottish powerhouse who shouted her way into the nation's heart with hits like Shout and the Eurovision winner Boom Banga Bang. To the public, she was the eternal girl next door, possessing an infectious energy and a smile that could light up the darkest room. In the late 1960s and transitioning into the 1970s, she formed one half of a golden couple when she married Maurice Gibb of the Bee Gees. They were young, incredibly talented, and seemingly perfect for each other. However, behind the closed doors of their London home, the The reality was a stark contrast to the glossy magazine covers that celebrated their union. Their careers were moving at light speed, but their emotional maturity was struggling to keep up with the demands of their fame. During her marriage to Maurice, Lulu found herself in a predicament that terrified her to her core. She discovered she was pregnant. For a young star whose entire brand was built on youth, vitality, and a certain innocent charm, a baby was a terrifying prospect. But more than the career implications, Lulu knew deep down that her marriage was not a stable foundation for a family. Maurice was battling his own serious demons with alcohol, and their lifestyle was a whirlwind of parties, late nights, and constant separation due to touring schedules. In a moment of brutal honesty with herself, Lulu decided that bringing a child into that specific chaos would be a mistake she could not afford to make. She made the heart-wrenching decision to terminate the pregnancy. It was a choice made out of a sense of responsibility, ironically, the realization that she could not be the mother she wanted to be at that time, and that her partner was not in a position to be a father. Lulu kept this secret for decades, terrified of the judgment of a conservative British public that viewed her as a national sweetheart. The procedure was done quietly, erased from the official schedule, just another generic medical appointment in a diary full of tours, television appearances, and recording sessions. She had to navigate this physical and emotional trauma while the world watched her every move, expecting her to remain the happy, carefree girl they saw on screen. The emotional toll was significant and contributed to the eventual breakdown of her marriage to Gibb. The silence she had to maintain created a wall between her and the world. She had to go on stage, sing happy songs, and wave to fans, all while carrying the physical and emotional pain of her choice. It was a performance far more difficult than anything she had done in front of a camera. Lulu eventually became a mother later in life, but she has spoken in later years about the sadness of those early days. She described the deep pain of knowing that her life was too volatile to support a new life. Her story highlights the immense pressure on young female stars in the 1970s to prioritize their public image and professional stability over their private desires. They were forced to make irreversible decisions to stay on the treadmill of fame, often sacrificing their own happiness to keep the show on the road. Lulu's experience serves as a reminder that behind the bright lights and the catchy pop songs, there were often young women making incredibly difficult adult decisions in total isolation. She saved her career and perhaps saved a child from a broken home, but the cost was a silence that lasted for years. Sharon Osbourne. Long before she became the matriarch of reality television and the sharp-tongued judge on The X Factor, Sharon Osbourne was known simply as Sharon Arden. She was the daughter of the legendary and fearsome music manager Don Arden, a man known as the Al Capone of pop. Growing up in the ruthlessly violent and chaotic world of rock and roll management in the 1970s, Sharon saw the industry at its most raw and unforgiving. She was surrounded by heavy metal bands, aggressive business deals, and a lifestyle that had absolutely zero boundaries. In her youth, Sharon was wild, navigating a world dominated by powerful men who took what they wanted, when they wanted it. She was living life in the fast lane, but the crash was inevitable. At the tender age of 18, Sharon found herself in a situation that would change the trajectory of her life forever. She was pregnant. It was a time of immense confusion and fear. She was essentially a child herself, living in a world of adults who behaved like children. The father was not a long-term partner, and the prospect of becoming a teenage mother in the high-octane, smoke-filled environment of her father's business was unthinkable. Sharon made the difficult decision to have a termination. However, the tragedy of Sharon's story lies not just in the choice itself, but in the horrific aftermath that followed. The procedure, performed in a time when regulations were looser and safety standards were often ignored for the sake of discretion, went terribly wrong. She suffered severe complications that would haunt her for years. Sharon has openly discussed the physical and emotional scars left by that day. Following the intervention, she developed an infection that ravaged her internal organs. It was a terrifying ordeal for a young woman to face alone, terrified to tell her intimidating father the truth about what had happened. The physical pain was excruciating, but the fear that she had permanently damaged her body was even worse. She spent years believing that she had destroyed her chances of ever becoming a mother, viewing her medical complications as a cruel punishment for her youthful mistake. This traumatic event cast a long shadow over her life. When she finally met and married the Prince of Darkness, Ozzy Osbourne, and wanted to build a family, the ghosts of the 1970s returned. She suffered a heartbreaking miscarriage and struggled immensely to conceive. The guilt of that early decision weighed heavily on her mental state. She felt she was being penalized by the universe for the choice she made at 18. It took years of medical intervention, patience, and heartache to finally have her 3 children: Amy, Kelly, and Jack. Every successful birth was a victory against the odds she had stacked against herself years prior. Sharon's story is one of resilience, but also of deep, lingering regret. She represents the casualties of the sexual revolution of the 70s, where access to procedures was available, but the emotional support and medical safety were often dangerously lacking. She sacrificed her early fertility on the altar of a youthful era and spent decades trying to reclaim it. Her openness about this topic has shed light on the physical dangers women faced in that era, even those with money and connections. It was a lonely, painful secret that she carried while managing one of the biggest rock stars on the planet, a private agony hidden behind the public mask of the toughest woman in show business, Jane Birkin. Although born in the posh district of Marylebone, London, Jane Birkin became the ultimate symbol of the Anglo-French connection, a waif-like beauty who defined the bohemian chic of the late 1970s. Her relationship with the French crooner Serge Gainsbourg was the stuff of legend, passionate, artistic, and frequently destructive. Jane was already a mother to her daughter Kate when she plunged into the hedonistic whirlwind of the Parisian and London art scenes. However, the pressure to remain the eternal youthful muse was suffocating. She was not just an actress and a singer. She was an aesthetic, a living doll whose slender frame and wide-eyed innocence were her global trademarks. In the midst of this chaotic lifestyle, where days blurred into nights filled with cigarette smoke and loud music, the reality of expanding her family was a terrifying prospect. While Jane Birkin eventually became known as a devoted mother to 3 daughters, the early years of her stardom with Gainsbourg were fraught with difficult decisions. Biographers and close circles have whispered for years about the pregnancies that did not come to term, not just due to nature, but due to the impossibility of the situation. To be pregnant was to be grounded, and Jane was a bird that needed to fly to keep the public's fascination alive. The volatility of her partner, a man known for his genius but also his excesses, made the prospect of a newborn in their shared flat seem like a recipe for disaster. The industry in the 1970s fetishized extreme youth and thinness. A pregnant Jane Birkin would have shattered the illusion of the gamine girl that directors were desperate to cast and that Serge was inspired by. The decision to visit a clinic during these years was less about not wanting children, she clearly adored them, and more about the sheer incompatibility of a baby with the demanding, travel-heavy, and unstable life she led. It was a sacrifice made at the altar of their shared art, a decision to prioritize the creation of music and film over the creation of life at that specific, turbulent moment. The diaries she left behind hint at a woman who was often torn between her maternal instincts and the demands of being a full-time muse to a volatile artist. The procedure itself was a stark contrast to the romance of her public image. While the world listened to their breathless duets, Jane was dealing with the cold, clinical reality of ending a pregnancy to maintain the status quo. She had to recover quickly, hiding any physical or emotional pain behind her signature fringe and basket bag. There was no time to mourn. The cameras were always waiting, and the public expected to see the carefree girl they idolized, not a woman grieving a loss. This compartmentalization was a survival tactic, a way to keep the show on the road even when her heart was breaking. Years later, the melancholy in Jane's eyes and her often fragile emotional state hinted at the toll these years took on her. She carried the weight of the Je t'aime era, not just as a badge of honor, but as a heavy cloak. The silence regarding these lost potential lives was a common trait of her generation. Women were expected to handle these matters with a stiff upper lip and return to the set the next day as if nothing had happened. Jane Birkin's legacy is immense, but the shadows of the decisions made in the cold light of the 70s remain a poignant part of her complex history. She gave the world art, fashion, and music, but in the quiet moments, she paid a price that no camera ever captured. Barbara Windsor. To the British public, Barbara Windsor was the quintessential bubbly blonde the cheekiest star of the Carry On films, whose infectious giggle could brighten the darkest cinema hall. She was the nation's sweetheart, a symbol of naughty but nice fun, popping out of bikinis and delivering double entendres with a wink. However, behind the feathers, the high-pitched laugh, and the slapstick comedy, Barbara's life was a dramatic saga of gangland connections, volatile marriages, and a desperate struggle to maintain her position in a cutthroat industry. Her bubbly persona hid a steel resolve and a history of heart-wrenching choices that she would only reveal fully in her autobiography decades later. While the audience saw a carefree pinup, the woman behind the image was navigating a minefield of personal and professional crises. Barbara Windsor admitted to having 5 terminations during her life. 5. It is a number that shocks many, but it serves as a brutal illustration of her reality in the 1960s and 70s. During this era, Barbara was often the primary breadwinner for her family and, at times, for her partners. She was trapped in a specific image, the dolly bird, that did not allow for a baby bump or the responsibilities of a nursery. The producers of the Carry On franchise viewed her body as a comedic prop. Pregnancy would have meant being written out, replaced by the next blonde in line, and forgotten. In an era before maternity leave was a guaranteed right for actresses, a baby meant the end of the show, and for Barbara, the show was her survival. Her relationships were equally complicated and dangerous. Married to Ronnie Knight, a man deeply embedded in the London criminal underworld, Barbara lived on a knife edge. Their life was a mix of glamour and fear, with police raids and whispers of violence being commonplace. She felt that bringing a child into an environment of uncertainty and gangland tension would be deeply irresponsible. Furthermore, she harbored a deep-seated fear that she did not possess the maternal instinct required to be a good mother. She had been rejected by her own father, a trauma that left her doubting her ability to nurture a child. She chose her career, her independence, and her audience over motherhood time and time again. Each visit to the clinic was a transaction, a piece of her soul for another year in the spotlight. She described these moments not with wailing grief, but with a practical, almost cold necessity that masked deep pain. She would go for the procedure and be back at work almost immediately, flinging herself into the role of the dizzy blonde while her body healed from the trauma. It was a coping mechanism born of survival. The industry did not pause for tears, and Barbara knew that if she stopped smiling, the phone would stop ringing. She locked the pain away in a box, buried deep beneath the wig and the eyelashes, presenting a flawless front to the world. The emotional aftermath of these decisions was something she grappled with privately for the rest of her life. While she publicly projected an image of having no regrets, saying she was not mother material, those close to her knew that the lack of children was a complex topic. She poured her maternal energy into her younger colleagues, her charity work, and later, the cast of EastEnders. Barbara Windsor's story is perhaps the starkest example of the industry's brutality. She gave absolutely everything to entertain the British public, sacrificing her own chance at a family to ensure that the laughter never stopped. She died a national treasure, but the silence of her empty nursery was the high price she paid for her crown. Pattie Boyd. Pattie Boyd was the ultimate muse of the 20th century, a woman whose ethereal beauty inspired the greatest love songs of the rock and roll era, including Something by George Harrison and Layla by Eric Clapton. In the early 1970s, she was at the absolute epicenter of the British cultural explosion. She was not just a model, she was a symbol of the perfect rock wife, beautiful, silent, and effortlessly cool. However, behind the gates of Friar Park, the Gothic mansion she shared with Harrison, Pattie was living a life of profound isolation. The fairy tale romance that had captivated the world was crumbling under the weight of Harrison's infidelities and his deepening obsession with spiritualism, which often excluded her. She was expected to be the devoted ornament in his life, but she was desperately lonely. In the midst of this marital decay, Pattie discovered she was pregnant. It was a moment that could have changed the course of music history. For a brief second, there was a glimmer of hope that a child might heal the rift between her and George, grounding them in a reality away from the madness of the music industry. However, the reaction she received was not one of joy. The atmosphere in their home was heavy with the scent of incense and the sound of chanting, but devoid of the warmth needed to raise a family. Patty felt an overwhelming sense that a baby would be an intrusion on George's spiritual journey and his chaotic lifestyle. The pressure was internal, but driven by the external circumstances of a marriage that was already dying. She made the devastating decision to terminate the pregnancy. It was a choice made in a fog of confusion and emotional distress. Patty felt that bringing a child into a home where the father was emotionally absent and physically distant would be an act of cruelty. She drove to the clinic, a journey that marked the final psychological break in her marriage to the beetle. The procedure was performed with the utmost discretion, a secret erased from history to protect the image of the happy couple. She returned to the mansion, to the silence and the shadows, carrying a grief that she could not share with anyone, certainly not with a husband who was drifting further away from her every day. The tragedy of Patty Boyd's story is found in the cruel irony of the years that followed. After leaving Harrison, she married Eric Clapton, hoping for a fresh start and a family. She spent years desperately trying to conceive, subjecting herself to grueling rounds of IVF and fertility treatments that ravaged her body and her spirit. She wanted nothing more than to be a mother, but it never happened. The realization that she had ended the one natural pregnancy of her life became a source of torment. She looked back on that day in the early 70s, not just as a medical decision, but as the closing of a door that would never open again. Patty's story is a heartbreaking illustration of the sacrifices women made to fit into the lives of great men. She was the muse who gave them the inspiration to create art, but when she had the chance to create life, the infrastructure of her world could not support it. She sacrificed her own potential motherhood to sustain the fragile ego of a superstar and the illusion of a rock and roll fantasy. Today, she speaks with a quiet dignity about her past, but the shadow of the child she didn't have remains a poignant footnote in the biography of a woman who was loved by millions, yet felt entirely alone when it mattered most. Her experience serves as a reminder that being a muse is often a lonely, thankless role, where the woman's needs are always secondary to the man's genius. Helen Mirren. Before she was the Grand Dame of the British Empire, playing queens and earning Oscars, Helen Mirren was the rebellious wild child of the British stage. In the 1970s, she was a force of nature, known as the Sex Queen of Stratford for her sultry and intense performances with the Royal Shakespeare Company. She was young, fiercely intelligent, and undeniably sensual, a combination that terrified and titillated the male-dominated theatre world in equal measure. But behind the confidence and the critical acclaim, Helen was navigating a precarious path. She was determined to be taken seriously as a classical actress in an era that was all too ready to reduce her to just a body. The pressure to prove her worth was relentless, requiring a single-minded focus that left little room for error or distraction. It was during this ascent to stardom that Helen found herself facing the ultimate ultimatum. She discovered she was pregnant. For a rising actress in the competitive world of 1970s London theatre, this was not a joyous announcement, it was a career-ending catastrophe. The schedules were grueling, involving months of touring, late nights, and physical demands that were incompatible with carrying a child. Moreover, Helen knew instinctively that the industry would not wait for her. If she stepped off the treadmill to become a mother, her spot would be filled by the next hungry graduate from drama school within a week. The fear of being forgotten, of being relegated to domestic roles, was a powerful motivator. Helen made the pragmatic and difficult decision to undergo a termination. Unlike some of her peers who felt coerced by men, Helen's choice was driven by a fierce desire to protect her own destiny. She viewed her body as her instrument, a vessel for her art, and she was not ready to share it with a child. However, the procedure was not without its emotional weight. In the 1970s, the environment in clinics was often cold and judgmental. Women were processed quickly, their personal crises treated with a clinical detachment that bordered on cruelty. Helen had to walk into that sterile room, make a choice that went against biological imperatives, and then walk out and return to the stage, reciting Shakespeare as if her world hadn't just shifted on its axis. The decision solidified her path. She chose the crown over the cradle. Over the following decades, Helen Mirren became one of the most celebrated actresses in history, but she remained childless. She has spoken in later years about having no maternal instinct, a narrative that she constructed perhaps to shield herself from the intrusive questions of the press. Yet, the choice she made in her youth was a defining moment. It was a sacrifice of a potential parallel life where she might have been a mother, traded for the life of a legend. She prioritized her contribution to culture over her contribution to the gene pool. Her story is a powerful example of the agency. Women in the 70s began to seize, but also the harsh reality that they could not have it all. To rise to the top of a profession that demanded everything, something had to be given up. Helen Mirren sacrificed her fertility to ensure her longevity. Every award on her shelf, every iconic role she has inhabited, stands on the foundation of that early, difficult choice. She walked away from the clinic and never looked back, channeling all that potential maternal energy into her work, becoming the mother of 1,000 characters instead of one child. It is a legacy of brilliance, purchased with a silence that she has carried with dignity for over 50 years. Marina Sirtis. Before she found global fame exploring the galaxies as Deanna Troi in Star Trek: The Next Generation, Marina Sirtis was a young, struggling actress navigating the gritty streets of North London in the late 1970s. Born to Greek parents in Hackney, she lived in a world caught between the strict, traditional values of her family and the liberated, chaotic energy of the London drama scene. It was a time of immense pressure, where aspiring actresses were expected to be available, attractive, and unencumbered. Marina was desperate to break into the industry, attending endless auditions and facing the harsh rejection that defines the life of a performer. She was fighting for her place in a world that saw women as disposable commodities, and she knew that her window of opportunity was narrow. In the midst of this professional struggle, Marina found herself facing a personal crisis that would leave a permanent scar on her psyche. She discovered she was pregnant. At that moment, she was not a star. She was just another girl in London trying to pay the rent and catch a break. The timing could not have been worse. She was in a relationship that she knew, deep down, did not have the strength to support a family, and she was terrified of what a baby would do to her burgeoning career. In her mind, and in the minds of the agents and casting directors of the time, a pram was an anchor that would drag her dreams to the bottom of the ocean. The fear of missing out, of failing before she had even begun, was a suffocating weight. Marina made the harrowing decision to undergo a medical termination. It was a choice driven by fear of her parents' reaction, fear of poverty, and fear of losing the identity she was trying so hard to build. The procedure was performed in a London clinic, a place she remembers for its bleak atmosphere and the sense of finality that hung in the air. She walked in as a potential mother and walked out as an actress with a secret. The physical pain was manageable, but the psychological toll was immediate and devastating. She had traded a life for a chance at a career, a gamble that felt incredibly heavy in the quiet moments of the night. For years, Marina buried this trauma deep inside. She moved to America, landed the role of a lifetime, and became an icon to millions. But behind the serene, empathetic character she played on television, the real Marina was grappling with a profound sense of loss. She has since spoken bravely about how the decision haunted her, describing it as a ghost that followed her across the Atlantic. The grief was compounded by the fact that she later struggled with fertility issues, leading her to wonder if the universe was punishing her for that early, desperate choice. The what if became a constant refrain in her life, a question without an answer. Her story is a powerful reminder of the hidden sacrifices made by women before they become household names. We see the glamour and the success, but we rarely see the steep price paid for the ticket to Hollywood. Marina Sirtis sacrificed her early chance at motherhood to pursue a dream that was far from guaranteed. It is a testament to the brutal binary choice forced upon women in the entertainment industry: the role of the mother or the role of the star. She chose the latter, but the sadness in her eyes when she speaks of her past reveals that the victory was not without its casualties. She carries the memory of that London clinic with her, a silent passenger on her journey through the stars. Susie Quattro. Though born in Detroit, Susie Quattro became an adopted daughter of the British nation and the undisputed queen of the 1970s glam rock scene. Petite, fierce, and permanently clad in black leather, she smashed the glass ceiling for female rock musicians, proving that a girl could play the bass guitar just as hard as the boys. She was the face of Top of the Pops, a symbol of rebellion for a generation of British teenagers. However, her rapid ascent to stardom in London came with a heavy personal price tag. Under the tutelage of the legendary British producer Mickie Most, Susie was a product that had to be sold, and there was no room for error in the marketing plan. In the heat of her breakthrough success with hits like Can the Can, Susie embarked on a passionate relationship with her lead guitarist Len Tuckey. It was a romance forged on the road, amidst the adrenaline of live performances and the chaos of touring. But when Susie discovered she was pregnant, the music stopped. She was on the precipice of global fame, the it girl of the moment. The industry wisdom of the time was brutal and uncompromising. A pregnant rock star was a contradiction in terms. Her management and the record label had invested a fortune in her image as a tough, independent, leather-clad warrior, not a mother pushing a pram. Susie made the devastating decision to terminate the pregnancy. It was a choice made out of professional necessity, driven by the terrifying fear that if she stepped off the roller coaster now, she would never get back on. She later described the experience as one of the most traumatic of her life. The procedure was carried out in secret, a clandestine operation to ensure the tabloids never caught wind of the star's vulnerability. She left the clinic and went straight back to work, channeling her pain into her aggressive stage performances. The bass guitar became her shield, protecting her from the grief she didn't have time to process. The emotional aftershocks of that day followed her for years. Susie has spoken candidly in interviews about the missing child, a ghost that haunted her even after she eventually married Tuckey and had 2 children later in life. She often wondered if the universe would punish her for putting her ambition before her biology. The guilt was a heavy companion on the tour bus, a silent passenger that no amount of applause could drown out. She was the first female bass player to become a major rock star, but she paid for that title with a piece of her soul. Her story reveals the ruthlessness of the 1970s music industry in Britain, where female artists were often treated as commodities with expiration dates. Susie Quatro had to sacrifice her first chance at motherhood to kick open the door for the women who came after her. She stood on stage, screaming into the microphone, while privately mourning the life she had chosen not to bring into the world. It is a stark reminder that the leather armor she wore was not just a fashion statement, but a necessary protection against a world that demanded everything she had to give. Marianne Faithfull. Marianne Faithfull was the golden angel of the swinging 60s who fell to earth in the gritty, unforgiving reality of the 1970s. With her blonde hair and ethereal voice, she was the muse of the Rolling Stones and the face of a generation that promised freedom but delivered chaos. However, her life with Mick Jagger was far from a fairy tale. It was a chaotic blend of artistic brilliance, relentless substance use, and constant police scrutiny. By the late 1960s, transitioning into the harsh light of the 70s, Marianne found herself pregnant with Jagger's child. It was a moment that could have anchored her, a desperate chance to step away from the precipice of addiction and find some semblance of stability in a world that was spinning out of control. However, the universe had other plans, and the lifestyle she was embedded in was toxic to a nurturing future. The pressure on Marianne was immense. She was not just a singer, but a symbol of rebellion, a woman who had been dragged through the mud by the British press after the infamous Redlands drug bust. The media hounded her, painting her as a fallen woman, and the stress was unbearable. While she desperately wanted to be a mother to this child, calling the baby Corina, the environment around her was collapsing. Mick Jagger was at the height of his fame, and the rolling circus of the band left little room for a quiet family life. The narrative of her life during this period is a tragedy of circumstances forcing a hand, where the chaos of rock and roll consumed everything in its path. Marianne later spoke of the deep trauma of losing her potential future during this era. Whether through a coerced decision to visit a clinic or the physical toll of her lifestyle leading to a tragic loss, the result was the same. She left the experience empty-handed. She viewed the loss of the baby as a payment for the excesses of her life, a cruel karmic balance demanded by the dark side of the music industry. The 70s saw her descent into homelessness and severe struggles on the streets of Soho, a downward spiral that many biographers attribute to the grief of her lost motherhood and the end of her relationship with Jagger. The interruption of her journey to motherhood severed her last tie to a normal life. The tragedy of Marianne Faithfull is that her talent was nearly extinguished by her grief. When she finally emerged years later with the Broken English album, her voice had changed. It was no longer the sweet soprano of As Tears Go By, but a raspy, cracked baritone that carried the weight of her history. Every note she sang seemed to mourn the children she did not raise and the innocence she lost in clinics and cold London flats. Her story is a harsh reminder that being the queen of the scene often meant sacrificing the ability to build a home. She survived the wreckage of the 70s, but the ghost of the daughter she named Karina remained a haunting presence in her music and her memories.